We have been expressing this for 10 years or more than 10 years now, that we've been in politics through our speeches, through our writings, through our political programs. Diplomacy begins with our immediate neighborhood. All forms of diplomacy. And as the Prime Minister just reminded us, one of Africa's fundamental mistakes is that we have our gaze turned elsewhere. Perhaps it's an extension of a form of alienation resulting from colonization that makes us think outwardly focused. We believe that in order to be recognized, a diplomatic act must be directed abroad towards certain powers, certain countries, and that visiting a neighboring country, an African country, is not valued in the same way as going to certain major Western American or Asian capitals. We need to break free from this complex. And that is why we believe that the potential for cooperation we have with the African countries is much greater than what we try to expect elsewhere. And as the Prime Minister mentioned earlier, the level of intra-African trade is worryingly low. The main consequence, of course, is the increased cost of everything we consume. We export from very far away. We travel 8,000 kilometers, 10,000 kilometers, sometimes even more, to export and import finished products, most of whose raw materials actually come from Africa. We need to break this cycle. We need to break free from this complex. And that is why today we remain open to the entire world. The President of the Republic has made several trips outside the continent. I myself will start making such trips from now on. And I haven't started traveling yet, rest assured. We have a lot to do, and we are going to do it in the interest of this country with very specific objectives for each trip. I would simply like to say that within the framework of this cooperation, in our relations with Congo, we have considered that there is more and better to be done. You mentioned earlier about cooperation, which we have already tried and which works quite well. In terms of defense, there is an agreement ratified by Congo, which has not yet been ratified by Senegal, but we are going to work on ratifying it as soon as possible. As for education in general, I believe that we are almost completely satisfied in that area. There are many young Congolese who are currently studying at our various universities, and sometimes they even choose to stay in Senegal to work or for other reasons. When it comes to trade and economic exchanges, the situation is much less impressive. We have agreed that we can do better. I won't tell you the exact figure for our trade, but it's very, very low. I'll give you a very simple example. As I mentioned last time in Sierra Leone regarding bauxite and iron, today West Africa imports a huge amount of wood because West Africa is largely Sahelian, or at least mostly Sahelian. Most of us are not forest countries. If you take the example of Senegal, the small strip of forest we have is in the south of the country, which today is under severe threat. West Africa imports more than $513 million worth of wood. And I can tell you that most of this wood certainly comes from Congo and other Central African countries to be processed outside the continent, and it comes back to us at a much higher cost. Senegal is the second largest importer of wood in West Africa after Nigeria. 17% of West Africa's wood imports are accounted for by Senegal. That's more than 70 billion in imports, at least according to official figures. Here is an area of cooperation that could be interesting because Congo is the second largest wood reserve in the world after the Amazon. the capacities are extremely significant. By working with Congo, we can try to preserve what little forest we have left without depleting Congo's potential. By working with Congo, and we welcome the new momentum in Congo because this is what needs to be done in Africa. Each African country should organize itself so that the raw materials from its land are processed, at least at a primary level, or even fully on its own soil. Congo has taken this resolution to ban the importation of raw wood, and that's a very good thing. In the areas of cooperation we are considering, it is possible for Senegalese people, for the Senegalese private sector, to go and invest in Congo to process wood and even move towards the most advanced forms of transformation, particularly in the fields of furniture, plywood, and whatever else you can imagine. Then the process would first transformation, the primary processing should also be transported to Senegal. Then beyond our own consumption here, to meet the needs of the local market, our ambition is to make Senegal a hub from which we can distribute to the rest of West Africa. And so these are the kinds of cooperation initiatives that we have discussed at length and for which we have set up an ad hoc committee that will work to make this a reality. We hope to do this in the spirit of mutually beneficial cooperation. We are Africans among ourselves. We are not in a mindset where one has to take advantage of the other. That is not the logic. Instead, these should be mutually beneficial partnerships so that at the end of the collaboration, Congo feels that it has gained much more from this model of cooperation than from models oriented outward, perhaps toward the outside world. And that Senegal also feels it has gained much more by working with Congo, and it imports wood from far away, beyond its own needs. It could serve as a conduit to transport Congolese wood to the rest of West Africa. These are the kinds of reflections that were initiated today, and we believe that we are on a path that will allow us to elevate cooperation, but above all, to bring our peoples closer together, because that is also the importance of this discussion. On the issue of energy, I consider that Congo is a sovereign country that at a certain point felt the need to move toward a particular form of organization for its energy sector. A call for tenders was launched. Senelec, which is a Senegalese company and a source of pride as a Senegalese enterprise, competed alongside other companies from countries much more powerful than ours, as well as other African companies. At the end of the process, it was chosen in a transparent manner. We are pleased about this and also congratulate the Congolese government. The Prime Minister mentioned earlier that the contract is very strictly regulated because it is not only Congo but also Congo's financial partners who are involved in funding this activity, and they have closely monitored what has been done. As Senegalese, we can only be proud that Senelec was able to perform at this level. The Prime Minister recalled a number of incidents that led them to suspend. I just want to focus on the word suspension. There was never any question here of canceling the contract. There are internal concerns that led the Congolese government to consider that it was necessary to suspend in order to make a number of adjustments. I remain convinced that this contract will be perfected, that it will be approved, and that it will serve as a great example of what we can achieve within this dynamic of South-South cooperation, of cooperation between African countries, because often we are embarrassed to have to bring in companies from very far away, which is not a bad thing. We are not closed off. In fact, we are even quite proud sometimes to say that such and such a company came from a certain European country or from a certain American country. We need to be able to feel that same sense of pride as well. Senegal is an open country. There are companies from many other African nationalities, as I mentioned earlier to the Prime Minister, that operate in Senegal, win major contracts, and work here. There are Senegalese companies that are now flagships. For example, I will mention Sonatel, which today is present in at least, in addition to Senegal, 3 other African countries. Senegalese companies also aspire to conquer African markets, and that is actually the spirit of the AfCFTA, to be competitive because no favors are given to them, and to be able to operate in those countries, provide satisfaction to those countries, but also to grow and develop based on the markets they have in those countries. And I remain convinced after listening to the Prime Minister, because we discussed it first the day before yesterday at dinner. We discussed it this morning one-on-one, and we discussed it again just now during the meetings. If our friends from Congo had intended to put an end to this market, perhaps we wouldn't be here discussing it. Perhaps even this visit would not be happening the way it is. And I have also had extensive discussions with the highest authority at Senelec, who is very open-minded, who understands most of the concerns raised here, and who believes that it is quite possible, in fact, to address them in the easiest way. And I think, Mr. Prime Minister, that Senegal once again expresses to you, to the President, His Excellency Denis Sassou Nguesso, and to all the Congolese people, because among the concerns, there is the fact that some have doubted whether the state of Senegal truly supports Senelec. Senelec is indeed a private company governed by private law, but I believe it is 90% owned by the state of Senegal. So every action taken by Senelec should be considered as being carried out on behalf of and for the state of Senegal. And the state of Senegal will support this intra-African company so that it becomes a resounding success, allowing us to show the world that we can achieve together what is being done elsewhere, united as one. As for the last question, unless I missed any, I believe we are talking about taxation and the impact of certain ongoing procedures on investment decisions in Senegal. These are questions not that they don't arise elsewhere, but they often come up in a rather curious way when it comes to Africa. I don't think Senegal subjects companies investing on its soil, whether they are Senegalese, African, or international companies, to more tax pressure than elsewhere in the world. That doesn't exist. It so happens that in the past there was a certain perception, not that this applies to all companies, let's be clear, but a certain perception, also facilitated by internal practices, by internal collusion, by poor behavior within the administrations, but also among political authorities, that one could come and invest in our countries, reap the greatest profits, and then quietly leave without fulfilling their tax obligations. This was often the way things were done. We all need to agree that, at least here in Senegal, those days are over. We have a tax framework that is the same as anywhere else in the world, which is not repressive but also not overly permissive. We are not a tax haven, but we are also not a country that overtaxes. We have a standardized, normal tax system that meets international standards, the best international standards at least, and this tax system is applied uniformly, whether you are Senegalese, Japanese, Congolese, or German. There is no discrimination.